Dear friend, these are great times. These are great times. I have been I guess what's been called a conspiracist for a long time. This is from people who don't even know what a conspiracy is. By the way, little background: conspiracy it's a good word. Nothing wrong with this. Conspiracy does not mean crazy. Conspiracy is a confederation or an agreement between two or more dastardly people to do something normally not good. Conspirare means, in the Latin, to breathe with, to breathe together. It's an organization. Conspiracy merely deals with the configuration of the group of people involved in the commission of an event. That's all. It's the agreement to do something. And just, I'm going to say that whenever anybody gives me the chance to say it, because people still don't understand what it means. They think of it in terms of a pejorative, and it's become a pejorative by people who frankly don't know what the hell they're talking about, which is the story of my life and the bane of my existence. Now, I make no apologies as to who I am. I don't know. You can think of me whatever you want. It really doesn't matter. But there is something happening now that is of such importance and such criticality. I want you to be aware of, and we'll get to Mr. Carlson in a moment. When the internet first started, just give me this prefatory moment, this prolegomenon, if you will. When the internet first started, at least initially, it's redundant, but anyway, it was a Wild West. Oh my God, it was the greatest. And there were people that I hope is one day, given the credit he deserves, Alex Jones. Notwithstanding any other particular event, any particular view, any particular gripe you might have with him in terms of setting the tone for this frontier joy that the internet was, he is it. And he inspired more people and more of an exploratory, avant-garde way of thinking regarding this notion that what history is not necessarily true. Don't forget the words of Tolstoy. Remember this, dear friends. Remember this. There isn't a day that goes by when I don't quote it to someone. History would be a wonderful thing if only it were true. Now, in this particular piece, and the wonderful world of people who are on various internet platforms, and thank God for Elon Musk and others as well, we're seeing a resurgence of people who are questioning the accepted official narrative. God bless these people. Now, in this particular case, I want you to listen. This is, again, Tucker Carlson, who was on with Joe Rogan. And enough can't be said about Joe Rogan, Lex Friedman. We'll talk about them, whatever, and what they have done and how their unique personality skill sets have been just incredible. Now, very quickly, I also want to say that Tucker Carlson, I have absolutely 100% nothing but admiration and appreciation for what he's doing, especially what he's doing right now. But I want to provide his particular analysis of something which many of us have been suggesting, and this is the palace coup, the soft coup, the coup d'etat that occurred regarding the ablation, the historical expurgation of Richard Nixon. Okay. And I'm so glad that Tucker brings this up. So I want to play this portion of his interview that occurred with Joe Rogan. But I want to tell you and stop and give you a couple of critiques, a couple of ideas, both as somebody who's been doing this for a while, somebody who also knows a little bit about cross-examination and the development of evidence, and also the best way to lure people in. And I'm going to give you a little technique. It's not necessarily just to tell somebody the fact, but you always want to make people think that they've discovered this themselves. That they've discovered something. They did it. You gave them maybe the fundamental kind of the working parts, the abecedarian elemental components, the ingredients, but they put it together and made a gumbo out of it, and they came up with the truth. Always. Don't tell people things. Let them discover it. And one of the rules which I want to explain is when you do not have evidence of something, but you would bet your life on it, that still doesn't do. Use the phrase, I wouldn't be surprised if. It's the same thing that you're saying, but in a different way. Let's get out of brass tacks. Let's listen very carefully. This is so good. This is Mr. Carlson, who is speaking regarding his thoughts on the actual cause, if you will, the causal factors, the proximate cause of Richard Nixon's, again, expurgation and ablation, his excision from history. And listen very carefully. And we're going to be stopping and starting, so get ready.
And if you look at what happened to Richard Nixon, which I, of course, did not understand at all, Richard Nixon was taken out by the FBI and CIA, and with the help of Bob Woodward, who was a Washington Post reporter, who had been a naval intelligence officer working in the White House, working in the Nixon White House.
Okay, stop right there. Let's go back a little bit. And by the way, God bless Tucker for bringing this up now, because the theme is that history would be a wonderful thing if only it were true. You never heard this. Somebody told you this. History is this, as Napoleon said, history is this myth that men agree to believe. It's this myth. It's this narrative. We just say it. We also talk about how crazy Nixon was, and Nixon was he's always poor, and he hated the Kennedys, and he lived, and he was, remember, whenever somebody tells you something, it is not the truth. It is something that they want you to believe. Let me say this again. The news in particular is not the truth. It's the narrative they want you to believe is true. Now let's go back at this. A couple of things I want to bring this to your attention. Okay, listen carefully.
And if you look at what happened to Richard Nixon, which I, of course, did not understand at all, Richard Nixon was taken out by the FBI and CIA.
Stop. We do not know this for sure. As much as what you're saying is most probably true, as much as what you were saying is 100%. I mean, nobody is going to say, what? There's no evidence of this. None. And I get this all the time. There is people say it all the time. Well, the mafia was, Carlos Marcello was involved, and he killed Kennedy. Well, the CIA killed Kennedy. There's no evidence that anybody will satisfy. It's like this Operation Get Rid of Nixon, it's declassified. It doesn't work like that. So you can change this. Say, it appears that if I didn't know better, the CIA and FBI. Now, there's a reason why I think that's true, or could be true, if there's evidence of it, because what this does is this provides probable cause versus reasonable doubt. What does that mean? As a detective, as somebody who was involved in homicide investigations, regular investigations, and crimes, you start off saying, I think there's something there. I think there's something there. I think the evidence is there. You have an hypothesis or hypotheses that provide a real good hint, a real good basis, a real good suspicion factor for you to go after somebody. I think it makes sense, right? Makes complete total sense. Good. That's probable cause. If you went to the jury and said, now, what do you think? Have I proved this beyond a reasonable doubt? No. Probable cause is just that first initial suspicion inquiry level. Reasonable doubt is what you need to convict. It'll never be reasonable doubt. You'll never get that absolute evidence that a jury will say, yep, that's it. That's at the criminal level. Now, civil level, preponderance of the evidence. Think of this. Think of a seesaw, or a teeter-totter, as we used to call them. Imagine you and somebody who weighs exactly the same amount of you. The teeter-totter, the seesaw is even. Then all of a sudden, if one person weighs one gram, one picogram more than the others, anything anything more than 50%, anything more likely than that, that will survive a burden of proof at the civil level of preponderance of the evidence. This is a reasonable doubt. Okay. Now that I've bored you with that one, let's go back. So let me go back again. Remember, we don't know this, Tucker, but you're probably right.
And if you look at what happened to Richard Nixon, which I, of course, did not understand at all, Richard Nixon was taken out by the FBI and CIA.
Taken out, yes.
And with the help of Bob Woodward, who was a Washington Post reporter, who had been a naval intelligence officer working in the White House.
Now, yes, with the help of Bob Woodward and with the help of Carl Bernstein and with the help of Ben Bradley and Mark Felt, who ultimately was Deep Throat. Now, remember what happened at the time. J. Edgar Hoover and the intelligence, the intel. Remember, I always talk about the deep state, the police state, the intel state, the shadow government, the ruling class. These are subdirectories of an overarching shadow government that pretty much run the show. And the intel agency, the intel components of this, have their own hierarchy, and you must pay homage to them. And it was very, very simple. Felt was the guy who was going to necessarily inherit this from J. Edgar Hoover when he died. And Nixon said, no, I want Pat Gray. What? What? Oh, yeah. Wait a minute. You what? And that got the ball rolling. See, that's one of the things. It's not that they didn't like Nixon. Why? Why? Nixon was one of the greatest presidents of all time. Nixon was one of the greatest presidents of all time. If you want to talk about somebody who was absolutely, bald-faced, absolute, clinically psychopathic, you look at Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson was a thug. Lyndon Johnson could probably, if he wasn't psychopathic, if he wasn't a serial killer, I don't know what. Nixon was quirky, but Nixon was one of the great intellectuals of all time. Nixon's interest was not domestic. He was one of the most progressive presidents of all time with NEA, and we'll talk about that later. So understand why. Nixon really pissed them off because he said, I'm not going to go with Mark Felt. You're not going to tell me what to do. I want my guy. No, we want to make sure that we have somebody who, by virtue of the provenance and pedigree, takes on all of the characteristics that J. Edgar Hoover had, because we've always got to make sure that the FBI is a branch of government, not a division of the executive, but a branch of government. And Nixon said, no.
Working in the Nixon White House. And then he shows up like a year later, and he's this brand new reporter. He'd never been a journalist at all. He's a naval intel officer, the famous Bob Woodward we all revere. And he's at the Washington Post, and somehow he gets the biggest story in the history of the Washington Post. He's the lead guy in that story.
Well, yeah. Let's go back to the narrative. Let's go back to what Ben Bradley and others say. And by the way, Ben Bradley was so connected. It's not even funny. You know, and I know that the world of intel, CIA, everything during that time, from a lot of men in particular who were in World War II at the time, there's a different mindset. Everybody was in World War II. Everybody remembers OSS and Blackjack Donovan and all of these folks. They knew the romantic part of this. It's a different mindset. I think. Who was it? I forget? Was it Nixon and Kennedy were the last to serve? Maybe I don't know if Ford was, but this was a mentality. So Ben Bradley, all of these guys, Harvard, and remember the old days before Harvard and these institutions gave way to this woke lunacy. Harvard was always State Department, but Yale was intel. Skull and Bones, Yale, the whole Carol Quigley, Tragedy and Hope, and this whole notion of the conspiracy groups, these secret groups. It's one of the things that Kennedy Kennedy hated, by the way, he betrayed it because he was a Harvard guy. He hated these secret groups. Nothing ever good happens from people who are sworn to secrecy. Think about that one. So, yes, but the story was that Bob Woodward, who happens was once Navy intel, always Navy intel, he says, I think I'm going to be a reporter. And then one day somebody said, hey, the assignment editor from the Washington Post says, hey, any of you guys want to go down to, there was a crazy, the police beat. It's a Saturday morning. Anybody want to go down to the municipal courthouse? Yeah, there was some kind of a break-in. Remember the story? Okay, Woodward, you come in here. You want to do this? All right. And Woodward talks about how he went when the judge said, where do you people work for? Who do you work for? And he heard CIA. And he heard this. And then Bernstein comes in. You remember this story? Bernstein, the street cred, legit, OG kind of street reporter who comes from a different side of the track, teamed up with this, silver spoon. Oh, this complete horseshit story. But it's a great narrative. Anyway, so they mentioned the CIA. They made it very, very clear. Oh, no, these were CIA people. Remember, always tell people what you're doing. That's the thing. Sleight of hand. They always tell you, I'm going to be doing a trick, but you've got to catch it. So tell people, if these people are CIA, tell them. Sturgis, E. Howard Hearn, go down the list. McCord, lunatic, G. Gordon Liddy. In any event, let us proceed.
Well, I worked at a newspaper. I've been in the news business my whole life. That is not how it works. You don't take a kid like his first day from a totally unrelated business and put him on the biggest story.
No, again, I'm not trying to. I'm not saying this isn't true, TC. I'm not saying that's not what happened, but that's not what the narrative was. The point is they didn't know what it was, and it was a Saturday, and you happened to be there. And then once you were on, they're saying, well, okay, well, we'll give this guy a shot. Ben Bradley, this hyper alpha male, who was friends with him, with Jack Kennedy. He hated Nixon. But he said, okay, well, since this kid just started off, let's see where this develops. And then as it mushroomed into this incredible story, then they said, well, let's let him stay on. Okay, so that's sort of the story.
But he was that guy. And who is his main source for Watergate? Oh, the number 2 guy at the FBI. Oh,
Mark Felt, Deep Throat. Yeah. And by the way, do you know how many people guessed Mark Felt? Do you know how many people? I mean, it makes in retrospect they say, well, I never heard of him. They knew exactly who he was. They knew he was a guy who was, as we say in West Tampa, empingado, because he wasn't picked. He wasn't picked by Nixon. So, paybacks or hell. So don't think for some reason that there was this obscure guy like Mark Felt. They knew who he was.
So you have the naval intelligence officer working with the FBI official to destroy the president. Okay, so that's a deep state coup. What else? How would you describe that if that happened?
No. That is not a deep state coup. No. Tucker, with all due respect, I love you, man. I love you, but we'll say, no, that's not. Had Nixon said, what the hell is this? What is it? Get the hell out of there. Hello? Yeah, Pat Gray, get over here. Yeah, I got some lunatics over here from my office who are claiming that I authorized or somebody. No. This is nuts. I'm going to fire all of them. Liddy, that crazy bastard. Get over here now. No, that's not what happened. Nixon's like this. Well, how about the money? We can buy him off. That's what kind of a coup is that? This person, he's basically aiding and abetting, counseling, procuring, hiring. He's an accomplice to his own undoing. So, yeah, it's a coup, but it's like framing a guilty man. You know what I mean? It's a coup, but Nixon could have stopped this so many times.
But in Guatemala, what would you say? And yet the way it was framed and the way that I accepted for decades was, oh, this intrepid reporter fought power. No, no, no. This intrepid reporter, Bob Woodward, was a tool of power, secret power, which is the most threatening kind, to bounce the single most popular president in American history, Richard Nixon, from office.
Okay, that's, again, an hypothesis. It's not proof. You're spot on. I mean, your instincts. And just because we know something, listen, half of the time we know, look, I believe there are electrons. I've never seen one before, but I take people's words for it. I mean, a lot of times we have to live on some degree of faith, and I think you're absolutely right. But just remember, when you're doing the narrative, if you said what you just said, ask a group of people. Now, does that sound funny to any of you folks? Yes. As opposed to, it's a coup. When you say coup, they're thinking something like the scene from the Godfather 2, where they threw the grenade inside, Batista and Castro and, Pinochet and the Shah, Maidan, in any event. So you're right. Your instincts, I would most probably, this is true, but finding evidence of it is a different story.
For the end of his term, and replace him with who? Oh, Gerald Ford, who sat on the Warren Commission.
Now this is interesting. This is an interesting story. And this is over here. Rule number 1, you will never find out who actually was involved in the killing of JFK. You just won't. It's just too many people, too much stuff, too many people, too many people trying to make their own bones, their own books, their own. You've got everybody from Mac Wallace to Sandro Trafficante to whatever. My favorite is one of the gunmen was Lucien Sarti, badge man, killed in Mexico City in 1972. It was a cancer. It was a melange of conspirators, because at the time, remember, I'm sorry, I'm getting off into JFK, but at the time, remember, post-World War II, OSS, the CIA, everybody worked together, from Mongoose to get Castro. But even in the days of Lucky Luciano and Vito Genovese, who, by the way, were intrepid patriots working with American forces in Sicily, and then with precursor to Gladio. And anyway, so there's always been an unholy combination, if you will, an unholy group, an unholy marriage between organized crime, the bad guys, and the government. So yes, Gerald Ford, one more word.
Now, how did Gerald Ford get to be Richard Nixon's vice president? Well, because Carl Albert, the Democrat Speaker of the House, told him, you must choose him. We will only confirm him when they sent the actual elected vice president away for tax evasion.
Spiro Agnew, by the way, whose famous line, the nattering nabobs of negativism. This wonderful alliterative phrase. I think Bill Zafire came up with that. Okay. Remember, interesting. Who was Gerald Ford's vice president? Quick. It's one of the most interesting, one of the best trivia questions, because people will, well, if you ask anybody today, they don't even know who the hell Gerald Ford was, much less his vice president. But it was, of course, Nelson Rockefeller. And people just forget it. The only time you had two people, the president and vice president, never elected by the president. Let me say this before we get into this stuff, and we'll get into this stuff later as far as why Gerald Ford. First, supposedly the story says, background story, give me a second on this one. Story goes, Nixon says to him, listen, all right, I'll resign, but I want you to tell Jerry Ford that I want a pardon, full and complete pardon, in futuro, prospective pardon. Anything I do, anything I did, anything, whatever it is, I want the whole thing. Word comes back, well, Mr. President, we're not too sure about that. What do you mean? Well, we're not sure, because they might have wanted to have him frog marched off and charged. To which Nixon purportedly said, well, do me a favor. Tell Jerry I know all about the Warren Commission, and I know how he moved that wound. I know all about that. So if Jerry's smart, and if he wants to maintain his position in history, and how he might have been one of the co-conspirators in the cover-up, the cover-up, the post-mortem, post-criminal cover-up, it might behoove Jerry to see it my way, and lo and behold, the pardon was, at long last, our national nightmare is over.
Agnew of Maryland. So you have a complete setup, like an absolute. Gerald Ford, the only unelected president in American history, actually sat on the Warren Commission. Something else that I accepted at face value until I looked at it and I was like, that's completely insane. You didn't want to interview Jack Ruby in your investigation of the assassination? Okay.
By the way, Jack Ruby got one of the fastest cases of cancer ever. You talk about turbo cancer? Talk about turbo cancer? Remember this? Jack Ruby said, hey, Jack Rubinstein, hey, I want to get me out of here. I want to talk about this thing. Wow. Turbocharged. So don't give me this O.J. Simpson stuff. There's been turbo cancer for the longest time. And do you think that the powers that be wanted Jack Ruby to be hanging around there? Remember, they got rid of a lot of people. They got rid of Tippett. They got rid of Oswald, and now they're going to get rid of Jack. Okay, we'll get into that later. But just remember this: turbo cancer, Jack Ruby, fast.
Hey, you're fake. Yeah, he was on the Warren Commission, and so
was Alan Dulles. That's the one. Alan Dulles, CIA, Alan Dulles. The JFK, by the way, said, I'm going to smash you into 1,000 pieces. Really? We'll see about that. Oh, I mean, they didn't even care. The Dulles brothers, John Foster and Alice, were, or Alice as I call them, Alan were, that's for another story, unbelievable.
Sorry for the long story, but the point is, like that happened in front of all of us, but the way it was framed cloaked the obvious reality of it. The people who broke into the Watergate office building, from which the name is taken, Watergate, I think it was 6 of them or 7 of them.
Yep.
All but one was a CIA employee.
Intel.
That's real. It's like, look it up on Google. So the whole thing, Richard Nixon was elected by more votes than any president in American history in the 1972 election. He was the most popular by votes, which is the only way we can really measure popularity, the most popular president in his reelection campaign. And 2 years later, he's gone. Undone by a naval intel officer, the number 2 guy at the FBI, and a bunch of CIA employees.
Well, yes. But a couple of things here. First, shout out. Way to go, Tucker. The very fact that we are able to enjoy this, and a shout out to Joe Rogan and Lex Friedman, by the way, two of my absolute favorites, because you see, you don't understand something. I come from the world of terrestrial talk radio, where we had some of the dumbest people programming this damn thing you've ever seen. And they always had these rules. We don't want to necessarily have, you're not going to talk too long about this. This is too, you've been talking for 28 minutes, and the average audience is in and out. You know what? Joe Rogan the other day was talking to some his 2 favorite archaeologists about soil erosion patterns in Egypt for like 3 hours. And it was as big as numbers ever. You have Lex Friedman, who covers the excitement spectrum from A to B, talking about gravitons it's just, and it goes to show you that they are rewriting what interests you, because you're smarter than you think. And let me rephrase it. You knew that I'm telling them you're smarter than they think. That sounds a little bit better. Americans in particular want to know the truth. But you see, the key to this, being a trial lawyer, is to be able to tell people and explain anything to them in whatever focused presentation is responsible. And however you get it across, Einstein said, or somebody said, I think it was Einstein, who said that if you can't explain it to an 8-year-old, you don't understand it. Years ago, quick desultory elliptical moment of a side issue here. Years ago, in my particular world, in trial law, they had this idea: should we have professional jurors? Professional juries, because sometimes you get into this weird, like, intellectual property issues or 10b-5 weird litigation and stuff. And I don't know if these average folks can handle something. And the trial lawyer said, no, it is the trial lawyers, the plaintiff's duty, or defendant's, but the plaintiff's duty in particular, or the prosecutor, to explain this in a way they can understand. Everything should be reducible to something that is clearly comprehensible. The story was they had some particularly interesting or fascinating case, and the jury was correct. And I forget what it was, something. And one of the lawyers went back into the jury room to retrieve his coat, and he calls his co-counsel or his opposing counsel, says, "Come here, you got to see this. Look." And there was a chalkboard, and they came up with the most incredibly beautiful schematic logically from the top to the bottom, and how, if yes, then no. If yeah, I mean, it was the most, and neither of them had thought of this. So what I'm saying is that we need to do a number of things. We have to, first of all, thank Tucker and Joe and Elon and everybody else for allowing us this chance. Number two, we have to say goodbye, say goodnight say goodbye to Hollywood, and say adios and sayonara to this ridiculous world of Fox News and CNN and all this other kind of jazz, because nobody has time for that. And number 3 or 4, whatever it is, you must understand this reference that history, even in your own life, what happened is different. Have you ever turned to somebody in your family, let's say a relative, a sibling, a parent, or somebody, and they tell this story, and you say, that's not the way I remember it. I was there. I didn't see it this way. Because you always see things framed through the prism of your own particular ideology, your own reference point, your own vantage. And all I know is this: when it comes to Richard Nixon, one of the greatest presidents of all time. Number 2, one of the worst intellectual hatchet jobs ever. Number 3, you don't really have any grasp of how reality can be shaped when affected by the people who shape reality. You have no idea how corrupt the media are and how they have been used by something that I don't think anybody in the Constitution or the constitutional, our forebears, ever kept in mind or had in mind, but to be used as proxies to shape and rephrase and retool the truth, so that the government can say, wait a minute, we're out of the bounds of the First Amendment because we're not doing this. It's not, Congress shall pass no law. We're not doing it. It's some private concern. No, it's not. It's a private concern that was basically put together by seed money from In-Q-Tel and some DARPA group, because all of these up until now, without much exception, are basically tools, subsidiaries of the shadow government. So what we do is we addict you to a particular platform. We then tell you, if you say or think something, we're going to disconnect you from the ability to think on that platform, and then everything's fine. You see what I'm saying? I'm using it as a proxy. It's brilliant. I mean, Eric Blair, George Orwell couldn't figure that one out. So in conclusion, Tucker Carlson, you're absolutely correct. The only thing, and it's not even a form of, it's not even any kind of, what am I trying to say? It's not a criticism. It's a stylistic suggestion, if that makes any sense. All right, dear friends, have a great and glorious day. Thank you so much. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I want to see specifically what you think. So comment as you see fit.